The head of the Israeli army has called for the military campaign in Gaza to be stepped up. General Herzi Halevi told troops at a ceremony in Jerusalem that there were signs that Hamas was falling apart after 2 months of bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Israeli tanks are reported to be slowly advancing towards the centre of Khan Younis as intense battles continue in southern Gaza. There are reports of house-to-house fighting in the city. There's also fighting in the north. These are the latest pictures from the Israel Defense Forces showing gun battles in the Jabalia refugee camp, which remains surrounded by Israeli tanks. People there say that they've been without food and clean water for several days. As the Israeli bombardment of Gaza continues, the United Nations says half the population of the territory are starving and 9 out of 10 can't eat every day. The UN Food Programme, World Food Programme, insisted that only a fraction of the food supplies needed were coming in. But an Israeli military spokesperson said they were doing everything they could to get aid into the Gaza Strip, but that trucks needed to be checked first for security purposes. Our Middle East correspondent Yolande Nell has the latest.
The misery of life under canvas. 4 in 5 Gazans have now fled their homes. And away from the front lines, they're still fighting to survive, with severe shortages of food and drinking water. Aid agencies say that they're struggling to deliver the basics, even close to the Egypt border where supplies come in.
Humanitarian aid at the moment is the only lifeline for people, and we're simply not able to get the access that we need to get through. For the past 4, 5, 6 days, aid agencies such as UNICEF have only been able to access the Rafah governorate, and even then it's been with very limited aid. And if we can't get through soon, people are going to really, really struggle because there isn't enough water, there isn't enough food, there isn't any shelter.
Israel's ground campaign is now focused on the southern city of Khan Younis, troops saying they're going house to house and tunnel to tunnel. And the head of the Israeli army is calling for the offensive in Gaza to be stepped up, amid signs, he says, that Hamas is falling apart. Here in Jabalia in the north, the battles are at close quarters. One local told the BBC they've received no food or water for 5 days. Israel is under growing international pressure to spare Gaza's civilians.
Other countries should also understand that it is impossible, on the one hand, to support the elimination of Hamas, and on the other hand, to call for an end to the war, which will prevent the elimination of Hamas.
After this group of men and boys taken by Israeli forces 5 days ago were released, they claimed they were tortured. Among them, Mohammed Mahmoud Salim, held separately from his dad. They made us sleep naked, he said, and kept hitting us with their guns. They hit me when I asked where my dad was. They hit us with wires. The BBC has asked the Israeli military for a response. New aerial shots show Palestine Square, previously a bustling spot of Gaza City, now under control of Israeli forces, marking the Jewish Hanukkah holiday. After 2 months of the most intense ever war between Israel and the Palestinians, the scale of the suffering and devastation here is unprecedented. Yolande Nell, BBC News, Jerusalem.
We can just show you some live shots now of Gaza itself. This is the view from Israel looking into Gaza, and you can see huge plumes of smoke there on the skyline going up into the sky. We've been watching these pictures for a couple of hours now, and there's been constant plumes of smoke rising up over Gaza today. That's the live pictures from a camera in Israel pointing towards the Gaza Strip. Our Gaza correspondent, Rushdie Abu Alouf, gave me the latest on the situation inside Gaza.
Last night there was a very heavy fighting in Khan Younis, not from the direction that the Israelis have been trying to, move into the city center of Khan Younis, but from another direction in the east of Khan Younis. They came from Bani Suhaila village and they cut through Salah ad-Din road, and now they are advancing from another direction into Khan Younis. People were talking about very heavy fighting overnight and this morning, with also Israeli artillery fire was heavy in that area. Since the collapse of the humanitarian ceasefire, the Israeli army was pushing hard towards the city of Khan Younis. Khan Younis is the second biggest city in the entire of Gaza Strip, and it's the place where about 1 million people came displaced from the north, and they were taking Khan Younis as a shelter. Now they have to move further west to the area called Al-Mawasi. It's a very small area, not designed to receive this number of people. There's no building or infrastructure in it, and also other people were left to Rafah. Rafah is a very small town near the border with Egypt, and people are now hundreds of thousands of people are taking this very tiny piece of land as a shelter, and the humanitarian situation is really severe in the area with very little aid coming. Other two key places where the Israeli army is pushing hard is the east of Gaza City, Shijaiya neighborhood, another stronghold for Hamas, and in the north, Jabalia refugee camp. But last night, the focus of the operation and the fighting, the heavy fighting, was down in Khan Younis.
We've been hearing from UN officials saying that aid is really only reaching a very small area of the territory. I mean, what is, in terms of the movement of people, how much are people heeding those warnings and moving around, or are some people just finding that they're having to stay put despite the fighting around them?
Yes, I mean, like in Jabalia in the north, there was warning from October the 13th, about over like a month ago, for the people to leave, but because the south is very crowded and people don't know where to go. And since the Israelis are controlling the main street, Salah ad-Din Road, and there is a checkpoint and fighting, according to Hamas-run local authority in the north, there's still about 100,000 people in Jabalia refugee camp itself, and that's almost like 30% of the total number of population who lives normally in Jabalia camp. Is the biggest camp, about 250,000 people, and according to like local authority and the UN, about 500,000 people are still in Gaza City and the north. And since this map of this divided Gaza into too many blocks were published by the Israeli army following the ceasefire, about 80% of the population don't have internet to activate this QR code and know where to go and how to go. The Israeli army is dropping leaflets in the area, but sometimes they ask the people to go from this corner to that corner, and they don't know that they should stay in the other corner where to go, because next day they might receive another warning to leave this corner. So very complicated humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Rushdie Abu Alouf there. Now let's go live to Jerusalem. We can speak to our correspondent Yolande Nell, and we've been hearing these dire warnings, haven't we, Yolande, from the aid agencies, talking about how people are starving and aid really isn't getting through to the people who need it. And then we've also, as the counter to that, we're hearing from the head of the Israeli army talking about how they need to step up their campaign in Gaza.
Indeed, and actually, if you look at what's been happening overnight, it does seem that there is an intensification of fighting. There's been smoke rising up from the horizon over the north of Gaza, and we've heard of heavy bombardment across the strip overnight. Then down in Khan Younis, the Israeli army has given more evacuation orders for places in the center of that city, seen as a stronghold of Hamas, telling them to flee. But we're hearing that the fighting actually now is along the main road between Khan Younis and Rafah. So already with hundreds of thousands of people crammed down close to the Egyptian border, it's not really possible for people to pass more along that route, and it's going to complicate this aid effort even more, with aid agencies increasingly complaining not just that there's not enough aid getting into the Gaza Strip, but also that it's impossible really to effectively distribute it inside Gaza.
We've also had the US approving the emergency sale of arms to Israel. Will that make a significant impact?
I mean, certainly this is just being seen as more evidence of the strong US support for Israel at this stage in the operation. It's been so important, with calls mounting internationally for a humanitarian ceasefire. The US had to use its veto power to prevent a resolution being passed at the UN Security Council on Friday night. So we see Israel at this stage really pushing forwards with its operation. I think it really wants in Khan Younis to try to find the Hamas leaders it believes are hiding there. It's the head of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, is from that city. He's not been found in the very extensive operations that there have been in Gaza City further north. And now that the pressure is on the Israelis really to try to find those Hamas leaders they believe may be holed up now in the south. and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu coming out overnight saying defiantly Israel will continue in our just war to eliminate Hamas.
What happened with the negotiations in terms of trying to reinstate the truce? Because we know that the Israelis withdrew their people, didn't they? But are people still carrying on those negotiations, the Qataris? Like, what is happening on that front to try and reintroduce the truce? Because so many people in Israel will be wanting to know about what the issue with the hostages, won't they?
Of course, and yes, the Qataris, the Egyptians, with US involvement as well, are still working behind the scenes, we understand, trying to get another deal that could potentially bring hostages out. But at the moment, all the language from Israel, it's very sort of strong rhetoric about how they are pushing forward with this stage of their offensive. Last night in Tel Aviv, we did see large crowds gathering once again. It's making it sort of more solemn for Israelis, the fact that this is the Jewish Hanukkah holiday. There are many families who have hostages still being held inside the Gaza Strip, for whom this is a really difficult time, and 137 people still believed to be held there. And there are calls from some section of Israeli society for the Israeli government to do much more to bring those people home.
Thanks very much. You'll land now for us there in Jerusalem.